Just waiting for Habeeb. How you doing? How you doing? How was your ride this morning? Well done. Just waiting for Habeeb to join us. Let's see if it happens again. With this kerfuffle. How you doing, Kaz?
I'm very well, Kaz. How are you?
I'm good. I've pinned you down. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for
Yes. How are
thank
you?
you for the invite. I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well.
You're good. Okay, I've got your book here.
Okay.
Yeah. Man of the Hour. Yeah. So, I just want you to quickly just talk about your book and how your journey in terms of author, growing up in London, you know, being a Muslim, being African and Muslim, and all that entails.
Yeah.
So whenever you're ready, introduce yourself, where you grew up.
Yeah. So, okay. So, my name is Habeeb Akande. I'm a Nigerian, British-born Muslim, from London, UK, and I'm also the author of 6 books. One of the books I've written, which Stephen just showed, is called "Illuminating the Blackness: Blacks and African Muslims in Brazil." Very high level. So the book deals with issue of race relations in Brazil and the contributions that Black people, in particular African Muslims, have made in Brazilian history since the 19th century, where a number of enslaved African Muslims, particularly from modern-day Nigeria, they led a number of slave revolts. So I wanted to kind of speak about the contributions that the African Muslims have made in Brazil and also their legacy. So now there is a growing Black consciousness movement in Brazil, where similar to like the Black Lives Matter movement, there's similar movements going on in Brazil, which kind of started in the 1970s.
Really?
They have we've got like the Black History Month in October in the UK, and obviously it's in February in the United States. In Brazil, they've got the month is called Black Consciousness Month, which is in November, and it's a month obviously to celebrate the contributions Black people have made in Brazil and also to raise awareness. We know a lot about the racial history and the contributions of African Americans, and even in the UK, whereas people aren't aware that there are more Black people of African descent in Brazil than anywhere in the world outside of Nigeria. So they've got the largest population of African people. So even in terms of when everyone knows about the transatlantic slave trade between Europe and the Caribbean and America, where many people aren't aware that 10 times more Black people were transported to Brazil than to the United States. Now, one of the reasons why, so just a bit about myself in terms of background. Obviously, I'm not Brazilian. I've been interested in Brazil for different reasons from a relatively young age. I was introduced. So initially, my introduction to Brazil, like many probably Black boys in the UK, was through images of carnival or football, like Ronaldo, the '94 World Cup or '98 World Cup, depending on how old you are, or it might be before that. Now, I went to a Pan-Africanist Saturday school in where was it? It was near Kentish Town, near Camden Town.
Really?
It's called the called Winnie Mandela Saturday School. The same Saturday school which Miss Dynamite went and Akala as well.
Oh, okay.
And another one of my late friends, Victor Adeboden, who recently passed away. So when I went to that Saturday school between the age of 8 and no, between 8 and maybe 11, 12 by force. If I'm honest, it's not that I wanted to go at that time, but one of the things that they taught us was they were speaking about obviously the contributions about black people in history, and they spoke about the black people in Brazil and the Nigerians in Brazil and the influence of Nigerian culture, particularly the Yoruba culture in Brazil, which obviously me being of Nigerian descent and Yoruba, I was intrigued by that what in Brazil there's Nigerians and they speak my native, even though I don't speak Yoruba, they're still preserving the Yoruba custom and Yoruba culture and Yoruba religion. So I was really fascinated by that at a relatively young age, at 9, 10 years old. So from as far back as when I was 9, 10, that piques my curiosity in terms of wanting to know about Brazil and the contributions black people made. Now, the barrier which I face, which a lot of people I think in the Western world face, in terms of why we don't know much about the black people in Brazil, is the language barrier. So, for example, the UK is like the 51st state of the United States. We know as much about the United States as we do, probably I would say, that in France, because we share the same language. It's not because of proximity, it's because of the language, because France is close to us, but there's a large black population in France, there's a large Arab population, but we don't know much about it. I'm saying generally speaking, because obviously the language barrier. And similarly, that's the case with Brazil, that the average person in the West, or say in the UK or America, if it's not about football, carnival, even I would say, dare I say, hip hop music, like where you've got Brazilian women like the Snoop Dogg video or Jaro, there are only, or the film like City of God, there are only introductions to Brazil. So we're not even aware of the large black population. And I'm emphasizing black and African because many people's image of Brazilians, it's interesting when I speak to people, it's either they think they look somewhat like Cristiano Ronaldo, so like tan, right, tanned white, or like Neymar or Ronaldinho, who is mixed, but some people wouldn't. So that kind of look. Whereas you've got Brazilians who look just as much like me and you. So different shades, phenotypes, and they're a large, particularly in northeastern Brazil, because in Salvador da Bahia, many people when they think about Brazil, they think of Rio de Janeiro, obviously because of the carnival. When there's a large population of black people in Rio and also in Salvador. So even but to, like, again, without kind of like, it's not like preaching, but people have seen it, but they don't recognize it, kind of thing, like the black population. So many people have seen the film City of God, right? There's a number of the characters are black. Like they could be in Nigeria, they could be in America, but people kind of, there's a disconnect for some reason that when people think about Brazil, and because the Brazilian government since the 1950s, they intentionally orchestrated, they wanted to create an image of Brazil being a racial democracy, and racism doesn't exist. And that's what they propagate to the masses, especially to the outside world. So that's why many people's image of Brazil is that it's racial harmony, there's no such thing as discrimination, everyone's singing and dancing. Even many, dare I say, white Brazilians who come to the UK, they've tried to preach the same doctrine to me, not knowing that I've actually been to the country, spoke to many Brazilians, and I've seen the actual experience of black Brazilians is very different from white Brazilians. So unfortunately, there's many, even white Brazilians, who are unaware of anti-black racism, which is endemic. And many. It's because the country's segregated. So if you're a white Brazilian, you might not interact with many Afro-Brazilians, apart from if you're going to the carnival. And even there's, in the carnival as well, it's segregated. And there was, when the carnival initially started, it was only for white people. And then later they allowed black people to enter, but they're only allowed to enter some parts. So there's many pictures of carnival in the last 10 to 15 years where it's like a sea of whites, like yellow and white faces, and then the black are on the outskirts. So it's like apartheid in South Africa. And it's changing, which is good. And there's more black people. There's a heightened level of consciousness in terms of understanding the black movement and addressing racism, but there's still a denial amongst many Brazilians, because as well, many Brazilians are of mixed heritage, even quote unquote white Brazilians. And the reason why I'm saying quote unquote is because, and I'll try and give examples so people can understand what I'm talking about. And sorry, I'm going to use many footballers as an example, right? So if you look at, I don't know if you're familiar with like Oscar, the player that used to play for Chelsea, the Brazilian. Oscar?
He went to China, didn't he?
So but I'm saying, if you were to look at him, in the Europe, he might not be considered to be white because he looks tan somewhat. In America, they might say that somewhat Hispanic. In Brazil, he's white. He's white. right? Whereas someone like Neymar in Brazil, he's black.
Okay. Okay.
So they've got this idea that money whitens. So if you've got more money, you get to a certain level, then you kind of become white, so to speak.
So
There's an expression that money whitens.
okay, so the people like Neymar, Ronaldinho, and a few actors, even though they're mixed race heritage, if they were starting at the bottom, they'd be classed as black. And then once they got up the social ladder, they'd be classed as white.
Yes,
Okay.
white passing, not really.
Oh.
They'll be like the exceptions to the rule.
Okay.
Which is really interesting. So someone like a figure like Pele
Yeah.
is obviously clearly black. He's revered the world over.
Yeah.
Whereas in Brazil, amongst Afro-Brazilians, they don't look at him favorably.
Right.
A lot of them consider him to be a star. Yeah.
Why is that?
Because Pele doesn't speak about racism. He's like
Michael
seen
Jordan.
as like the uncle to
Michael Jordan.
right, like
Okay.
exactly. But Michael Jordan, even amongst a lot of the black population in America, he's still revered. But they don't. His politics and social.
Yeah.
He's not like LeBron James.
Yeah.
But he's like Michael Jordan, but times 5. I would say.
Yeah.
And then when you compare the likes of like Muhammad Ali, who's like, if you look at why he's celebrated, it's not necessarily for his sporting achievements. It's actually what he did outside of the
activism,
ring. Activism, and that's why we've like when I speak to many Afro-Brazilians, when they talk about Brazilians that like the players that they like, it's the ones that not only came from similar backgrounds but are proud of those. So even if someone like Adriano, who maybe didn't fulfill his potential, but he's kind of considered, he didn't lose his roots.
Okay,
or Jairzinho. So it's people that are in touch with the Afro-Brazilians or the Black Brazilians kind of thing, or in touch with, just say the poor, because that's where they come from, where there's a number of Brazilians who, once they excel, when they go to a certain level, they aspire to marry a white woman, they aspire to do everything that is to eradicate their blackness. And there's a really interesting, I'll show you this painting, which kind of illustrates Brazil's understanding of miscegenation, of whitening the race, where it's encouraged to, and again, I've got no issue with interracial marriages. People can, marry who they like, but there is, and this is state-sponsored, this is from the government, where it's encouraged for black people in Brazil to marry. So I don't know if you can see this image.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry.
Put up a little bit. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you've got an image of a black woman, an elderly black woman, with a she's thanking God, and then you've got in the middle of the picture you've got a mixed race woman that's holding a phenotypically white baby and a white man on the side. Now that painting is because the woman is the black woman is thanking God that her grandson is white. He's like something unfortunately which happens, is common in a number of Caribbean and particularly Latin American countries, where this idea to better the race, you need to marry someone who's fairer in complexion or whiter to kind of erase the blackness. And I've got Brazilian friends. So the anti-blackness within Brazil is something that now, like I said, maybe in the last 10 to 15 years, people are speaking more out about it and addressing it. But because the way Brazil views race is very different from America, that's why you can't use the American model. So, for example, in America, someone who's got a so-called drop of black blood, so the one drop rule, they're considered to be black, like if they're biracial. Whereas in Brazil, it's not like that. So how they judge blackness is descriptively. They've got over 150 terms, 130 terms to describe someone who is brown or black. So it's not just saying, so Neymar, he might self-identify and call himself, I'm mahogany, I'm not negro, I'm not black. Rivaldo, maybe somewhat dark in complexion, he might say, I'm dark mahogany. Someone else might, and it's all a way to kind of escape blackness, because unfortunately, because of the anti-blackness, everyone wants to escape being black. So they just brown then. Right, exactly. Exactly. So it's but like I said, because of social media in particular, there's a rise, there's a heightened level of consciousness, of black consciousness, where people want to address this issue and speak about the contributions that black people have made, about black pride, and even like when we speak about police brutality. Yeah, that's what I wanted to get onto. It's like, so what, obviously the unfortunate death of George Floyd and the likes, in terms of numbers, black people are killed like there was in Rio, I think it was like a couple of thousand, maybe almost 2,000 black boys have been killed by police in Rio de Janeiro alone within the last few years.
So you're
by the
talking for
police.
every George Floyd, there's like maybe if you split that into a day, maybe 5 or 6 in Brazil. Really.
Yes, and it's just it's like there was times when I was in Copacabana, you hear the gunshot and you don't even but because that's far away in the favelas, you don't really pay any attention to it. But it goes on that, and again, because the way Brazil is they look after the rich and the tourists.
Mm-hmm.
So you as a black person coming from the UK, you can go to Brazil, and unless you probably would notice it because obviously you're conscious, but you could go there and not realize the social inequalities between the races, but it's clear to see if you want to see it. But you can still go there and you'll be sheltered and not see the racial inequalities kind of thing. So it's something which, again, so even if I'm honest, I had no aspiration to kind of write about anti-blackness in Brazil or the history of Brazil. It was, I went there on holiday, I wanted to enjoy myself, but going there and I'm seeing the way black people are treated, the way even when I went to the hotel, they were like, so in Brazil, there's hotels where one for the service people and the one lift obviously for guests.
Yeah.
Now, when I walked in, they kind of like looked at me and said, "Oh, like where you going?" And they said, "You're going to the wrong place."
Yeah.
And I said, "Sorry." I said, "Sorry." Obviously, they detect my accent. Oh, gringo. Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay.
So I knew, and I didn't feel, privileged. Oh, now they're treating me well because of my red passport, my British accent. Because I know it's something that if I was Brazilian, I would be mistreated.
This would be a normal
I'll be stereotyped. And so it's something which, again, then I wanted to investigate. And speaking to just everyday Brazilians, especially Afro-Brazilians, they kind of showed me a different side of like the real Brazil kind of thing. So whilst, I bought into the racial democracy from the movies and the hip hop videos from, Pharrell and Ja Rule and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful country, but if you're black and Brazilian, your reality is very different from if you're like white Britain or you're a foreigner.
Yeah, very true. So do you feel, you're giving us all this information. So in terms of the Afro population in Brazil, if it's the biggest outside Nigeria, why is it that when we look at the diaspora, we're not hearing about their struggles? It's all, I know it's the American narrative that dominates, but we're not even hearing it from, like, similar to the Caribbean, where they're starting off, with three or four different types of handicaps, where it's economic, it's social, it's all kinds of things, it's the colorisms, but we're not hearing it on a global black scale in terms of comparing it to other places where we live.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, I think it's because of the language barrier.
Okay.
So even though, and the thing is that because even if you look at South America, Brazil is the only country that speaks Portuguese. All the other countries speak Spanish.
Yeah, why is that?
So it's because of the colonizers.
Oh, okay. So the Portuguese just got there first.
Yeah, the Portuguese. Well, the Portuguese. There was Germans as well. There was French, but Portuguese ultimately they won in terms of. So there's inter-conflict between some of the Europeans, but it was the Portuguese that initially. And even when we speak about, and I do mention this in the book, the Portuguese didn't discover Brazil. Like, as the story is told, that in 1500s when Portuguese found Brazil, when there's reports and there's evidence which demonstrate that Africans, so like for example, to the Mansa Musa, I'm sure everyone's familiar with, the 14th century Mali emperor, his predecessor took 2,000 ships and travelled towards the other side of the Atlantic, and there's evidence which, again, many people don't know it because it's in the history books, but it's hidden. And there's reports which indicate, because some of the gold nuggets from Mali was found in Brazil, in Recife, in northeastern Brazil, before the Europeans landed in Brazil. And even Christopher Columbus, when he was in America, when he went to America, he found some traces of like gold nuggets that came from West Africa. So the presence of even black people in America, it predates the transatlantic slave trade. Yeah. So black people but again, this is something which, because the history is generally told from the perspective of the victors, which are the white people. And to be fair, unfortunately, many black people, even if we know about these things, we do not document it.
Mm-hmm.
That's something which I said, okay, let me take it upon myself, because I was, you know, I've been hearing these different things. I did my own research. I said, let me try and document it, and then the little thing I can do with my platforms, kind of to not just speak about slavery and the persecution that black people have been subjected to, but the positive contribution. So there was a really fascinating story of a 19th century black man from Nigeria who was enslaved. Then he was enslaved by, he was a Yoruba man. He was enslaved by Hausa, other Nigerians. Portuguese bought him and then transported him to Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
We've been there 15 years. He bought his freedom. Then worked as a cook on a slave ship. Traveled back to Africa, where he wanted to further his knowledge about the religion of Islam and things like that. Then traveled back to Brazil,
Yeah.
and then fathered a son. Now this is like an extraordinary story in the 19th century, where an enslaved man, enslaved by other black people, but then was transported to Brazil, bought his freedom, then went back to Africa to further his studies, and then went back to Brazil to father a child and died there. Now again, even just hearing that, it sounds like what that, you know, even if some of that this day and age people become surprised by it, but that shows that again. I didn't want to just speak about, because we know about the transatlantic slave trade and a lot of the atrocities that were black people subjected to.
Yeah.
And I think with many black people, the reason why, even in Brazil, I think some people don't really want to hear about the history because they're somewhat ashamed of it.
Yeah, I found that. Just across the board.
So it's the thing where we have to acknowledge it and talk about it, because the legacy of slavery is what we're still living in today. So
Yeah.
I do address that, but also I try and speak about, okay, the contributions since slavery and even during slavery, what black people were able to achieve, and the contribution that they've made, again, particularly in Brazil, and how many Afro-Brazilians are being inspired by the likes of Malcolm X in the United States, Jimmy Cliff as well. So when Jimmy Cliff went to Brazil in the 1970s, and then there were many people, because they were fans of his music and he's very conscious,
Yeah.
they used that as fuel for their consciousness movement, if that makes sense. So again, it's not, again, I'll do speak about the atrocities, but there's things like I mentioned earlier about Mansa Musa's predecessor, Abu Bakr II, traveling to Brazil before the Europeans, which many people are not aware of. And then after slavery as well, the contributions, and even like in popular culture, so things like, I'm sure many people have seen Michael Jackson's video, They Don't Care About Us. He shot two. He shot one video in prison,
Yeah.
and he shot one video in Brazil. And he was wearing a t-shirt and had Olodum.
Okay.
Now, Olodum is a reference, it's an Afro-Brazilian consciousness movement, and it's also a steel band,
Okay.
which they play in the carnival. But the word Olodum is also in reference to the name for God in Yoruba.
Okay.
So even in Brazil, Afro-Brazilians, they're still speaking about their African heritage, especially their Yoruba heritage.
Yeah.
So there are many Afro-Brazilians, even when you go to Brazil now, who are speaking Yoruba to this day.
Pure Yoruba.
Like, you feel like, yes, like I feel like obviously I don't speak it, but I understand some words. Yeah. And there's people, even the way you see some people, and features wise, they look like they're in Lagos. You feel that you're in Lagos, which is crazy. Even some of the dishes, so like what's it called again? Akara.
Yeah.
You know, akara. Like, yeah, they eat that in Brazil, but it's called akaraje. Cooked exactly the same way.
Yeah.
The way some of the women are dressed with the head tie, you see Brazilians in northeast of Brazil dressed that way. So the cultural ties are very strong, even stronger, I would argue, than I would say, just say in America. Like, you wouldn't see visibly people that are preserving African heritage for like hundreds of years, like they do in Brazil and Cuba as well. Because Cuba has
very much so.
Yeah, so it's, again, for me, it was like, okay, because many people aren't aware of like this history, particularly in English-speaking countries. First, he said, let me put in this information in the form of a book, and then I am working on a documentary as well. But I've been saying this for the last like 3 or 4 years, and it should have been released by now. I've been having some issues with the production team, so
we need to see that, man. You need to make that happen.
I know. I was having some talks with BBC Brazil and some other broadcasters. So I'll put some snippets out on YouTube, but I might then just put the thing out on YouTube. So
Yeah,
because I know a lot of people, they prefer to see it rather than actually read
yeah,
it, because obviously the book is quite chunky, and even since it came out in 2016, I haven't read it since. So I even had to look back and like just before today's chat, I was reminding myself about some things, because I mean, let's be honest, not everyone is a fan of history, which I understand, but history is
yeah.
important.
It's very important.
Some people, yeah, so some people, they want to see the visual and then maybe read the book or use the book as reference. So that's why my starting point was, okay, let me put this down in written form, because that's something that will last beyond my lifetime and people can, see. And then if I can have the, then maybe try and work on a documentary and then network with other Afro-Brazilian and even Brazilian who aren't black, because there's a number of Brazilians I know who are white who wasn't aware of this part of their history, and they want to know about it. Do you understand? So it's not just speaking to like Afro-Brazilians or black Brazilians, but what I did want to emphasize, or I want to emphasize here is, and I mentioned it previously before, is that when we're looking at different countries and cultures, it's important that we understand how they view race and race relations, not use our model and try and impose it on them.
Yeah,
Because that's something that I've noticed a number of activists, for example, from America, they will use, because how they define blackness in America, they'll try and it's very different. It's different in South Africa. So it's important to understand the nuances as well. There are white, quote unquote, white passing Brazilians who consider themselves to be black, just because they're fair and compassionate. So it's important to understand how they view things rather than me or other people from outside telling them this is how they should kind of deal with their issues, so to speak. So it's more of like an observation and listen exercise more than anything.
Yeah. Because I think looking at Brazil, I probably have more of a connection with their struggle than African Americans, because it's almost set up to the Caribbean and South America probably share a similar heritage, because they kept bringing over Africans, turning over because the slavery was more harsh, so the people were able to maintain more of a culture and a connection, rather than in the US, they brought their set over and that's what they worked with. So once they were there was a disconnect, Whereas in the Caribbean, it's still maintained. You can still see it. It's strong in the language, in the food, in the culture, and I think that's why Caribbean people, even in South America, and French Guiana, there's more of a definite connect, And
even though I don't speak Portuguese, I felt more of a connection with Afro-Brazilians than I did with when I went to America. Like what you said is really interesting, because I don't know what it is, because maybe I think it's like you said, because a lot of Brazilians, not only did they preserve the African heritage, you didn't feel like an outsider. It was like a long lost brother or long lost cousin. Whereas because African Americans have developed their own unique culture, is somewhat detached from and dissociated from the African. Did you understand? Even if you can see some references to it, they're not claiming it as such publicly. Whereas Afro-Brazilians, from the carnival, even a lot of the popular musicians, they reference Africa a lot and the African heritage. So for me, it was mind blowing, because again, there was times when you're hearing things, I'm thinking, am I West Africa? Like honestly, it's really, that's why I do encourage people to go, especially black people, because I mean, you do hear about the crime and the violence, but the funny thing is, when you're black, is that it's the opposite. Because when people feel like, when I speak to some of my friends and they said that when they've gone to Brazil, they feel like they feel threatened or someone's going to rob them and things like that. I didn't experience that, and I realized probably it's because I'm black.
It worked for you.
Because they look at it actually works for you. They look at you, they think, oh, you're from the favelas as well. You haven't got anything. Whereas a number of my friends who, when they've gone, they are seen as a target. Because when you're white, they see you as either you're a rich Brazilian or you're a rich foreigner.
You're a target.
Whereas so if anything, so actually you're able to actually go there freely and not really think too much about you being discriminated and stuff against, if that makes sense. So, and obviously even with the police, unfortunately, it's unlikely the police will target you unless you're in a, like you're living in the favela. But in terms of driving, it's not, and especially when they hear that you're from the UK, your voice, your accent, you know, they'll leave you.
Yeah, because they know
I didn't,
bad publicity. So
exactly.
so
But sorry, go on.
Habeeb, we've got a question in the comments. Where can get your book from before we move on?
Oh, so it's, yeah, Amazon or my website, rabah.com/store. So RABAAH.com/store, or you can just go to Amazon. Should be on Amazon.
Yeah, so that was a question I just wanted to answer. So with the Brazilians, African Brazilian story not being told, how can we in the diaspora, considering that we've got young black people dying at 3-4 times the rate as in the US, yeah, what can we do to at least highlight the plight of what's happening there? Because obviously the more eyes on Brazil, you know, if they're going around killing their citizens and the whole world is looking at them, they'll have to fix up at some point, you know, because they don't want the bad publicity.
I think social media, with the George Floyd situations, it shows the power of social media, not only to raise awareness, but to make significant change.
Yeah.
Like, as much as people can say, and I mean, I'll try to be optimistic. I know that, you know, people have been speaking about police brutality for years, but what was it about the George Floyd? Why was it that George Floyd sparked this global movement? I think it's because people saw with their own, you know, barefaced eyes what happened.
Yeah.
And I think people aren't seeing that. They're not even hearing about it in Brazil.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks ago, there was a Brazilian police officer who stood on a black woman's neck. She was 51 years old. Yeah. And there was pictures about it. And there was a video about it. But again, because it didn't get picked, it got picked up by like the Daily Mail and a couple of mainstream outlets. But for whatever reason, it wasn't picked up by black outlets.
Okay.
Again, because many black people, even in the UK, we feel more connected to the US than even, I would say, than Africa.
Yeah.
So that's why I think even us in the diaspora, especially us in the Western world, where it's in the UK and US, we've got power and influence. So if we're kind of sharing these, and then it only, you know, you never know where it's going to lead to, then it's going to raise the consciousness of people, the masses. Yeah. Because like I said, there are many, I had white Brazilians who were asking me about, like, when after the whole George Floyd, when he was, you know, killed, and the outcry, they were asking me, oh, what books would you recommend me reading and stuff like that. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, don't you know about even like the racism in Brazil? Like, they were really shocked about what's happening in America. And I was like, you know, your country is far worse. What's happening? And they wasn't even aware of it. Really? And I even sent them some, honestly, these are good people, but they just, and I'm like, they're like in their 30s or what have you, and they spent most of their life in Brazil, but many of them were like, and I was like, okay, why did they know about what happened in America? Because of social media. You couldn't escape it. Even if you're in Baghdad speaking Arabic, you know who George Floyd is, because of social media, because of the cultural influence that Americans have got, which is a good thing. But then, and I'm not saying it's like all lives matter, like what about Brazil? No, I'm just saying, yes, the way which is great, we are speaking and voicing, and we feel one with our American brothers and sisters. We've got black people that are suffering in many other parts of the diaspora that we're not even aware of, or we're not listening. Yeah. Do you understand? Because and again, it's like, okay, what can we do? It takes a while, but for me, I would say social media is one way to raise people's awareness, and then hopefully that can spark something that can lead to like a global change. Because if the Brazilian, like the government, they are aware that the world is watching them in terms of how they treat black people, they will change. They always dismiss it, because remember, the global figures of Brazilian people to the world, apart from maybe you could say Brazilian models, they're generally black or mixed race. Yeah. Like the footballers or some of the artists. So in people's minds, it's like, how could Brazil be racist? Look at the football team. Yeah. Most of them, they're singing, they're dancing, they're always enjoying, but they're the exceptions. Yeah. They're the ones that are good. But people are forgetting And it's like, even if you just look at the Brazilian footballers, it's not a coincidence that most of the white Brazilians, they've come from middle class backgrounds.
Yeah.
Kaká, Dunga, Juninho, Leonardo, and most of like the rest of the Brazilians, the black or mixed race, however you want to call them, they all came from poor backgrounds.
Yeah.
It's not a coincidence. And that's part of the legacy of slavery, because ultimately slavery was abolished in Brazil in 1888, which was the last country in the Western Hemisphere to abolish slavery.
So there was a real resistance to letting go of the free workforce, really. So it's almost like when you look at Brazil, because they ended slavery so late, they're probably a couple of decades behind the rest of the Americas and Europe in terms of their mindset, you know. And it's a thing where Afro-Brazilians must be looking at the rest of the world like, black people are able to do this here and do that there, but yet we're still stuck in the same cycles of oppression, you know. And it's like, we should be able to uplift any black person anywhere, any person of color, regardless of where they are. And I think the American narrative, because it's the richest country in the world, and they basically have films are made there, the biggest media outlets are there, they have the monopoly on what news goes out. You know, so if a young black person dies in Paris, even though we're not 2 hours away, we're not going to hear about it. Amsterdam, Lisbon, Berlin, Rotterdam, we don't hear about it because we live in our own insular communities. But if it happens in Baltimore or New York or wherever, you hear about it. You know? It's really strange that we are not connected with our brothers and sisters in France, and we have it's a similar story, similar culture, similar problems and issues, you know, disempowered, you know, lack of education, bad housing. You go to Amsterdam and Rotterdam, and our Sudanese cousins are facing the same problems. You know, you go to Brussels, cousins there, same problems, Berlin, Lisbon, wherever we are. How can we kind of connect? How can we connect ourselves globally? Like, we can't just have all eyes on the US because, you know, it isn't helpful for the rest of us. Because if one's suffering here and no one's telling their story, they're still in that fight.
Yeah. Again, I think exchanging our stories, telling our stories. So, because many people, I don't think many people are ignoring the plight of Brazilians the black Brazilians in Brazil. They just don't know about it.
Yeah.
So again, because it's ignorance, or they're not aware of their history. Like, many people aren't aware of what happened to the black people in Argentina when they got wiped out.
Yeah.
There was a significant black population in Argentina that all got wiped out, to the point where, and again, football is a good indicator of showing the representation of black people, because for example, when you see many of the South American football teams, whether it's Peru, Ecuador, you see a black population. And obviously the descendants of slavery, Brazil, whereas Argentina, 9 times out of 10, and that was because they had the black population, but they went through similar to what Brazil tried to do when they wanted to eradicate the black population. And this was from the government, genocide. They went, but they were, in what they were trying to do, they were successful.
Yeah.
And eradicating the black population to the point where there's very few even traces of someone of African descent, whereas in Brazil, it was considered as a stain. So what Brazil tried to do was, by the miscegenation, because they didn't have the Jim Crow laws like America, where they said you shouldn't intermarry and things like that, they were encouraging people to mix, with the idea that hopefully the black race will kind of be eradicated within a couple of generations. That was the idea.
Wow.
Now, yes, and it's something that is still, again, especially amongst the high-profile black people, it's still something that's ingrained, that, you know, to better the race. And again, it's something that's subconscious. It's a difficult subject, and the reason why it's a difficult subject to have is because if someone obviously happens to fall in love with someone who's of very complexion, and then someone's now saying you're doing that, it's like, not like, they might not know why they're always like, why is it as a black person I love Italian designer clothes or the Italian designers? I would say it's my preference, or is it because I've been conditioned, because of the society I'm living, to prefer this over like an African designer? It's something that requires self-reflection, and especially for, you know, black people in particular, that why is it when you get to a certain level of success, you feel that to to be somewhat successful, you need a white partner.
Yeah.
It's a form of validation.
Yeah.
And it's something that, again, it's a difficult conversation to have, because that's something that I don't think many people would want to admit, but it's a conditioning, and it's not directly that they like saying, I don't like black people, I don't like my black skin, therefore I want to eradicate blackness from my progeny. But it's something that's been taught within the society for hundreds of years.
Soft way to do it. But even then, saying that, it's like when you put that in place, you affect generations after that, because then your son or daughter are looking to do the same thing because they've seen it in their own family setup. So you're kind of unleashing all of this self-hate indirectly, because it's almost like, yeah, you may question yourself and you may think, okay, in the society that I live in order for me to level up, I gotta have. So if I'm a footballer now, a black footballer, for me to be getting endorsements or contracts, I need to be seen with a white woman, isn't it? But if I wasn't that footballer, would they even look at me? That's how I see it. Would they even give me the time of day? From day one. And I wonder why that we do that if ever we're professional athletes or actors or somebody in the public eye, wherever we are in the world, So that doesn't just happen in Brazil, does it? It happens where we have communities, and I wonder why. At some point, these people must question themselves privately.
I think when they question themselves, it might be too late. As in, if, for example, after they've been married for a number of years or in a relationship for a number of years, or they've got children, if anything, that'll be very difficult to then bring that up, that, oh, I was conditioned to, because I had this inferiority complex and I believed white was right, or anything that came from Europe was, even though you recognize it, it's difficult to then actually say it, because that might even cause damage or affect relationships that you've got now.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so that's why I don't think, especially when you look at a lot of prominent people, and this is not only in Brazil, worldwide, prominent like black athletes and black footballers, I think we've been conditioned to think a certain way that we just think is our preference. So you won't question, why is it that I consider this type of person or someone from, even like if I were to say countries, if I were to tell someone I'm going to Brazil, people will be like, oh wow, that's interesting, right? If I were to tell someone I'm going to, and this is no shade against, if I was I'm going to Uganda, people, they won't be as like, oh, that's a holiday. It's like, oh, is that for family?
Yeah.
When I could be a very beautiful place in Uganda or Rwanda, and it's just got beautiful beaches. And when I'm going to Brazil, I might be doing volunteering for homeless people. But the image that's held, we can't deny that when we hear certain countries, certain places, we think certain things, that maybe some positive things come to mind more than others because of what we've been taught. So Brazil, what comes to mind is, the beaches, the carnival. Some people might be the favelas, some people might be the shooting, but that's what you've been taught or you've seen. Now again, in Africa, many African countries, if people were to say they're going to Morocco, Egypt, oh, you're going on a holiday, that's Africa.
Yeah.
But if you say to Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana, oh, you're going to see family. You even words we use, like even us ourselves, if I'm going back home, I'm going back home either to help people or to do. It's not because Africa's nice. It's not because I can enjoy myself. If I want to enjoy myself, I need to go to Rome, I need to go to Italy, I need to go to South America, because that's been sold as this is holiday destinations. Africa is not a holiday destination unless it's Northern Africa, which is predominantly like non-black, or Southern Africa, like South Africa, because of the white European influence. So again, it's something that it takes a while for us to even realize, even the language that we use, that if you've got a white person that's coming from the UK going to Spain, they're an expat. If it's a black person, it's an immigrant. So the words that we don't realize, and again, it's something that it will take a while to kind of unpack and kind of realize how we've been conditioned to value European and white culture, white people above others.
Yeah.
And then Asians above black. So but the first thing is there needs to be a level of awareness, and people will get that awareness at different stages in their life. And some people, it might be by reading a book. Some people might be while watching the Malcolm X film. Some people might be going to it early. Some people, it might be because they're in an interracial relationship and their white partner calls them the N-word, and then all of a sudden they realize, oh, actually, yeah, no, I mean, it's true, because people get this, like, for me, like with the whole Black Lives Matter, it's like, for me, I'm quite surprised that, oh, now everyone sees that anti-black racism exists. Everyone now sees
that's
that.
A red card, though. That's what am I supposed to do when that happens? This is done, really. It's a wrap.
Yeah.
And that's what even you married, because I think that even if, like, ignorance for me, the fetish, like, women fetishizing black men and vice versa, that level of insidious racism is as dangerous as I don't like you, I just don't like you. Liking you because you have this prowess, or this, that's as dangerous as the normal everyday stuff, you know. And I think that when I talk to a lot of young black guys and they feel that they're top of the food chain, you are top of the food chain for the wrong reasons. Not because you're smart or you're funny or you're intelligent. It's just on your physical prowess, which is really worrying, you know. And when they kind of check it, it's like, okay, they're wondering, because it's fun. And when it's time to get married and settle down, is it going to be the same outcomes? You know, and that's what they need to think about. What is it that? What is the reason why they like you? Yeah, and if it's real love and it's all the things that keep relationships together, then fine. But if it's just that surface stuff, it's not going to work, man. That's been going on for too long. And you know, we've got lots of children as a result of those casual relationships where they don't have that culture, because both parents are not of themselves, if you understand what I mean. And you know, they're looking for, you know, it's very much, why did you like dad? Because he was a good dancer. It's like, how many times have I heard that, man? You know what I mean? It's worrying that as there's so much work to be done, like internally. Yeah, I'm not even looking at the outside, internally, and we're still talking about what's going on outside our houses, rather than looking inwards in terms of our rooms and looking like, yeah, we need to get our youths valuing themselves. So if you see your next brother, you're not looking to do him something because he comes from across the road. Yeah, you're actually going to embrace him. You know, well, when are we going to start to do that? That self-hate thing, yeah, where it's, oh, he comes from there and I come from there. It's just the way it is. No, it isn't. You know, why do you hate him so much? You know, I think when we start to have those type of conversations and we start to look at the real reasons why we behave a certain type of way, and we start to unpick it, and we start to reverse it, maybe we can kind of just like start to make the small incremental changes, because it isn't going to happen overnight. It might take generations. You know, I'm hoping that will be quicker, but all of these systems have been in place a long, long time, so it might take just as long to unravel them. You know, I'm conscious of time, and I want to save this IG. So I think if it's under an hour, they can save it, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and I know that you're part of and everything. So thank you for taking time out your day to talk to me. This book is available on Amazon and
rabah.com/Tom. So RABAAH.com. Okay. Or just check Amazon.
Cool. And hopefully we can speak to you in a couple of weeks, you know, in terms of what's happening with you and your next steps. Because I'm looking, when you said about this documentary, yeah, my eyes kind of lit up, because the youths need to see they need to see films, and they need to see people like them in different places, because they're so stuck on London, you know. Yeah. You know, they need to see the struggle in the favelas in Sao Paulo, and that you think you've got it tough, take yourself over there and see, you know, how the roading is, because it's on a completely different level, and then they'll start to think how lucky they are being in London. It's true. You know. Yeah. So thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for the invite, Stephen. And all the best with you. Can keep inspiring and like empowering young people, adults as well. And mindfulness. That's seriously, just be, again, because it's not I was even looking at your website, and I love the work you're doing. And again, it's not something that even for this generation, for generations to
Yeah,
come.
yeah,
So
we're
yeah, just
sowing
keep.
seeds, man. It's sowing seeds.
Yeah,
You know, do it the Hebrew way for grandchildren and the next generation.
yeah,
Yeah?
definitely,
Okay, thank you, sir.
definitely.
All the best.
Take care, brother.
Okay.
Take care.